I would like to continue with our speaker, Kishan, who is from Belgium. You have prepared also a presentation. Please take it from here. Shall we? So sit.
Let me stand on this side of the podium to have a different view for everyone. Oh, they're going away, okay. So, hi, I'm Kishan. I'm working for the Belgian Road Safety Institute, and you're maybe wondering why are we currently talking in the name of the European Commission or Europe. We are actually present on multiple levels. So we work on public and private levels, both on national, international level within Europe, as well as on the international level with, for example, our ESRA network, where we try to get some insights in traffic safety, self-reported behaviors as well, which is quite interesting because we also work in terms of research, assessment of ability to drive. We have laboratories that focus on safety of motorcycle helmets, for example. So we have a wide variety of activities, and we try to provide evidence-based policy recommendations. So that's a bit what we stand for at VIAS. And we have been working as well on different P2W research activities since 2018. We've been working a longer time on these different topics. But I mainly wanted to stress that we focus both on vehicle technology, the road uses, attitudes, mobility aspects, and all of these different diversifications concerning power two-wheelers. Now, concerning the European Union, to give a bit of information, I'm not going to dive into all of the details, but what I think is quite interesting is to see the differences in terms of population density, and especially what we see in the distribution of population between urban, suburban, and rural living areas, because of course this also immediately relates to mobility aspects, people having different needs and taking different transport modes in order to perform all of their displacements. And we see large differentiations between all of the different member states, which is also something that we see in traffic safety figures. Now, looking at the vehicle fleet, based on figures from 2020, we see that P2Ws have a share of 12% in Europe, and it's also quite a big distinction between the different member states in terms of popularity, because in the south we of course know that most P2Ws are being used, while in the north it's often the case for leisure activities and a fewer share in that case of power two-wheelers as well. And we see also a difference between motorcycles and mopeds, which is quite interesting to mention. And in, for example, countries such as Belgium and the Netherlands, we also have these speed epochs that also are being used quite often, that are being integrated into these moped policies. Now, concerning mobility and use, may be important to stress briefly as well. We see that only about 1.9% of the modal share is actually attributed to power two-wheelers. So the number of kilometers that are being ridden is actually quite low in Europe in comparison to, for example, Asia, the Asian region. And when we look at the EU 24 countries, we see that 2.7% of the respondents indicated to ride an ICE motorcycle at least 1 to 3 times a week. So we see a completely different use case, and we also see quite large differences between all of these different member states, again showing important differences between the south and the north, of course, with also a diversity of use cases in case that the use of a power two-wheeler is defined by their owners, the patterns that they use, the purposes, the attitudes, safety views as well, all have an impact, and they relate also to, as we call it, a kind of profiling of a P2W rider, because there is no such thing as one P2W rider, which is also the case in Europe. Focusing on road safety, we can say, and the figures have been shown as well already by WHO, that the European roads can be considered as the safest around the world, but still we see that we have 44 deaths per million inhabitants, which is quite a lot. And the European Union tries to tackle this issue through their Vision Zero, which aims at zero traffic deaths by 2050, and a reduction of fatalities and serious injuries by 2030 by 50%. And they try to do that based on a safe system approach, trying to take different policy measures in order to, of course, achieve these goals. And all of these insights have already been provided as well in some previous presentations, so I'm not going to dive too deep into all of these different aspects. If my slides want to continue. Yes. It has been mentioned as well by Claire that we indeed have within the European Union in the baseline and the trend line projects, and we as FIAS Institute are also organizing or, let's say, leading some of these different KPIs or work packages. And the idea is that we have separate data collection methods between the different member states, and it's quite important in terms of, comparative, to make the comparisons possible between the member states, to have a uniform data collection. And we see, based on the baseline projects, we had 8 KPIs based on speed, seatbelt wear, helmet use, for example, alcohol, distraction behind the wheel, safe vehicles, safe roads as well, and post-crash care. But with the recent Trendline project, they are actually trying to aim to get more insights into some indicators for road safety and trying to collect that data on a broader level to have these comparisons more or less made easier on the European level between the member states. Now, looking into power two-wheeler road safety performance, it was highlighted again. There is a high share in road fatalities still in the EU, especially if we compare it to the number of kilometers that have been traveled by a P2W. It was 1.9%, but still, power two-wheelers and motorcycles, they have a share of 16% in rider crashes, so in fatalities, which is quite a high figure if you compare it to these vehicle kilometers ridden. So it's not easy to make the distinction immediately with, for example, Asia, where much more kilometers are being ridden. And we see, which was stressed as well, a lower decrease in motorcycle fatalities compared to all road fatalities. And also if we compare it to, for example, moped fatalities. Now, the highest number of these fatalities can be seen within countries such as Italy, France, Germany, Spain, and Poland. And this is quite logical because we have more exposure here. There is the largest motorcycle markets, and especially in the south of Europe, we also see a higher popularity of motorcycles and mopeds. I am currently basing myself a bit on the thematic report that we have written for the European Road Safety Observatory, and it gives some interesting insights in countermeasures as well as some problems related to motorcycling safety. And especially related to rate, we have to admit that we don't really have a good indicator of risk, crash risk with P2Ws, but we do know that motorcyclists have 9 to 30 times more chance to be killed in a crash compared to all of these other road users, which is quite a big problem. And this distribution of fatalities is also interesting to see because we find a higher share of fatalities with motorcyclists which have a younger age and then a decreasing trend, while for example for pedestrians and cyclists we see that the number of fatalities increases as age increases. So we see a completely different trend in terms of these fatalities. Now, we can look a bit into the aspect of the safe system approach, so focusing on the road users, the vehicle, and the road environment. For road users, we stated as well that, of course, we have to look into the aspect of safety both on the rider perspective, but also for the other road users. The other road users is often indicated a problem of perception and not seeing the motorcyclist or the moped rider, but also a wrong speed and distance estimation is often indicated in these crashes. But for P2W riders, we also have to acknowledge that there can be a problem in terms of risk and hazard perception, speeding, which was also found in the MATE study already quite a while ago, age and experience, and there we have to also make the distinction with experience that it's not always related to age, because what we see in Europe, we have some riders that have a riding break, and that, of course, has an impact on the experience as well, because if you stop riding for 10 years and then start using your motorcycle again, it has an impact on your riding experience. And training is also quite important. In terms of the vehicle, we of course have these intrinsic characteristics to the power two-wheelers. In terms of cornering, braking, it's more easily to fall, to have in that case a crash, which is also the case what we see for bicycles, for example. But we see also a relationship with the type of motorcycle, the engine, and the behavior of the rider. But it's not really clear what that distinction is or what that relation is, because we see a higher risk of crashes with sporty motorcycles. But we have to question ourselves whether that is based on the fact that it is a sporty motorcycle or the fact that it's the rider that chooses a sporty motorcycle that has a more risk seeking riding style, for example. So it's not always that clear what that relation is, but we suspect it's more on the road user side. And in terms of the road environment, of course, the infrastructure was also highlighted already a couple of times. Infrastructure both influences human behavior, especially if you look, for example, at road markings, the road conditions, but it also has quite an important aspect in forgivingness in terms of making sure that all of the consequences of a crash are not too severe. This is a slide, I think it's based on the figures for 2021, but this is in relation to the slide that Claire wanted to show for the figures of 2022, if I'm not mistaken. So it gives an idea of the crashes that occur between these different road users, and if we look at these motorcyclists, of course we see a high share with unilateral crashes, but also with crashes with, just general person cars, which is a big issue. And we can also make the distinction in urban areas. I think it's quite interesting to have more insights on these crashes and where these crashes occur. Now, we have been taking some recent actions as well in the European Union, and we can relate them a bit to that safe system approach in terms of licensing, personal protective equipment, the revised EU Road Infrastructure Safety Management Directive, but also in terms of vehicle technologies. And I know that some of the partners in this conference will also elaborate a bit more on these different aspects, which is also the case for eCall, for example. And looking into these countermeasurements, we see that, of course, we can relate these countermeasures well to the safe system approach. Training of car drivers is quite important. So not only looking at power two-wheeler riders to solve the issue of rider safety. Pre-license training that is focused on higher order skills is also quite important, because we see quite some training programs focusing mainly on these basic skills, trying to control the P2W, but it remains important to also focus on these higher order skills. To encourage safe riding behavior through promotional campaigns, it can be, for example, also done within marketing campaigns or within the different manufacturers, for example. Personal protective equipment and the helmet, but of course we need to be careful that if we strive for example, an obligatory use of personal protective equipment, it still needs to be affordable for the rider, because there is a big issue if we try to indicate, hey, you need to wear, for example, a protective jacket, which comes with quite a cost, that it has an impact on these mobility aspects, which are quite important for P2W riders, that they use it to travel to work. For example, also the heat in southern countries in Europe is also an important argument. To improve conspicuity, which is also quite important, and this can be looked into from the rider perspective, the vehicle perspective, and ADAS systems, ARAS systems, and CITS can also help to that, and I think CMC will also provide some good examples of improving conspicuity through technology. To also take into account the actual needs and constraints of P2Ws is quite important as well, and looking into forgiving roads. Now, some last personal recommendations. I personally believe that there is a need for more in-depth P2W accidentology studies. So we have some safety figures, we have some crash information, but we really are desperate for finding more information. And I refer to the MATE study, for example, dating back to 2009, if I'm not mistaken. We performed a study in Belgium as well, which dates to 2012, 2013. So all of these insights can be a bit dated, and we are in desperate need of finding some more insights, knowing what is happening. Did all of these countermeasures, were these implemented, and did they have a specific impact? The inclusion of P2Ws, of course, in policy, but I was not the only one saying this already today, is quite important, because P2Ws can have an important share in solving these mobility problems. But of course, if you want P2Ws to become more popular, we really need to make sure that traffic safety is taken into account. Awareness raising with policymakers and the public is also quite important, because we're sitting here as experts talking about motorcycling safety, but the issue is getting the message to policymakers, to governments that are not really focusing on this topic, that really have to make decisions. And we see it, for example, also in Belgium, that we raise issues and that they are not really aware of the safety repercussions or the safety problems with relation to power two-wheelers. So it's quite important to spread that message to non-motorcycling people as well, because it's also important for that category of people. And lastly, which is maybe bit more to the future, but the attention to level 4 and 5 automation in cars, maybe also heavy traffic, because power two-wheelers cannot be made automated. It's also the same for other vulnerable road users, so we really have to make sure that they are being taken into account when we go to full automation with all of these different cars, and especially the transition period that we see between full automation and where we are at right now. So thank you very much.